Silly me, forgot to send the StreamYard link to people.
I just go to the StreamYard.
Yeah, you're an admin, unlike everyone else. Which means you could have put the StreamYard link into the.
I was gonna suggest to send a message. I didn't think they don't have the link though.
So we're gonna have to wait for people to arrive. The host is here.
Thank you. I think maybe we ought to wait until Sandy gets here. I can't wait. We can't start this without Sandy.
No, we cannot. Is she coming? Let me make sure I send her a link so she didn't forget. She is coming.
See, I knew Sandy would be here.
And I have my book.
Oh my gosh. One more section to go and you have your book.
I had to find it. It was around here somewhere. I found my Ben Ish Chai too, Ben.
Oh, cool.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody, to the second to last Halakhic Man Jewish Book Club meeting. We read pages 99 through 117 this week. And I know it was delayed a little bit for Passover, so... and Ben, of course, was in Liechtenstein, so he had very important things to do.
I'm going to stop bothering Elijah with
Yes. I've just gotten used to it now. The bullying. And so I have compiled a bit of a list of some books for the future. And so after this, I will share it with everyone. And on just the Torah tab of the Jacob's Ladder Discord, and then you guys can add your stuff, and then maybe around Wednesday of next week, I'll just put a poll out for which books we want to choose next.
My vote is for Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust.
Really?
That sounds heavy.
It's actually, so I read it a long time ago. It's really inspiring.
Alrighty. Well, that's what I'll share after the stream. Is there any place that you guys would like to start, Ben or Sandy?
All right, I'm making a note.
Sandy, do you have something? You always have something.
No, I'm being quiet to start to see if you two have something.
But you're our leader, Sandy. You always have a good introduction. You find a good passage. What would we do without you?
Mm-hmm.
Oh dear, oh the pressure. Well, go on, Ben. You got something.
Well, no, I can diffuse the silence, but I was just thinking. Well, I had to read it multiple times because the first time I read it, not a lot connected for me, but it was really interesting. The second time I read it, was I was starting to see more things, and I guess the first thing that's interesting is really on the first page, 99.
Yeah.
Just the very clear proposition about the purpose of Judaism and the creating new worlds. That was very interesting. It was in a very assertive way. That was that is the purpose. And now let's continue with how I'm going to expound on that. So that was very interesting.
I really like this line. Even the scriptural narratives serve the purpose of determining everlasting law. The mere conversations of the servants of the fathers are more important than the laws, Torah of the sons. Like in this little corner, as much as we talk about narrative and stuff,
Can you read it again?
yes,
Sorry,
it's on the bottom of the first page.
Yeah.
Even scriptural narratives serve the purpose of determining everlasting law. The mere conversations of the servants of the fathers are more important than the laws of the sons.
Why were you contrasting that to narrative?
I wasn't contrasting it. It's exactly right.
Oh, okay, man.
Yeah.
Got it. Oh.
That's exactly what he's saying. Actually, that's a whole thing from Genesis Rabbah. The chapter dealing with Eliezer covers 2 or 3 columns, and his conversation is not only recorded but repeated. Whereas the uncleanliness of a reptile is a basic principle of Torah law, Gufei Torah, yet it is only from an extending particle in the scriptures that we know that its blood defiles as flesh. This is a Midrash, Genesis Rabbah. So, like, he's saying Eliezer, who was a slave of Abraham, right? The story is told twice, whereas, like, a halacha, right? Sometimes we learn a halacha even from like a particle of a word,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's like, how much time the Bible spends telling these little, stories.
Yeah. There was a couple of lines just before there, and I've lost. Yeah, and that bit which you had just said there. It's so back on the middle of 99. There's the statement: the dream of creation is a central idea in the Halakhic consciousness. The idea of the importance of man as creator of world. As a partner of the Almighty in the act of creation, man is creator of worlds. And then I've been thinking a lot about some of our conversations, because where you were reading, where I've actually said to a couple of people lately, where it's talked about Torah does not contain even one superfluous word or phrase. Each letter alludes to basic principles of Torah law, each word to well-fastened, authoritative, everlasting halakha. Yeah, I mean, you just mentioned all of that top section, Jacob, and I was thinking about how much in the conversations that I've watched you having with people lately, and there's so much of that. Our words create things, this sense of this whole beginning is about creation and about, even when I glanced at it, I was like, oh, I can't read this chapter. I remember the discussions on water, and and I'm like, things that are just sticking with me from the last few weeks. And I don't remember in most of my life looking with as much at the concept of the beginning. I love the opening of Genesis, and I've never really heard it discussed with so much significance. And that's what I see captured here in these first couple of pages. How very much attention can be paid to the tiniest portion of anything that God said. And when you say, I'm curious, because you said about the difference between like the story, the two repetitions of the one part, and then the law sort of its simpler format is just simply stated.
Well, it's even below that. So what the midrash there is saying. So, for example, right? How do we know that we wear our arm phylactery on the left arm as opposed to the right arm? Because there's an extra letter in how your hand. There's a hey at the end of yadcha, right? And from that letter, we learn that you wear it on your weak hand as opposed to your strong hand. And so a right-handed person wears their tefillin on their left hand, and a left-handed person wears it on their right hand. Like all of this halachic, like precision and the details, we learn even from small little ways that the Torah is written, right? Like an extra letter in how one word is written in one place in the entirety of the Torah, right? But you see that like the actions and the narrative, right? It's it just really hit me because in our little corner, like where we talk um so much about the importance of narrative and the propositional, perspectival, and procedural. Right? Did I say all of those? There's four of them.
Yeah,
There's
I think.
yeah. So propositional, perspectival, procedural, and
Participatory.
participatory. Right. So like and actually I was talking with Yosef a while back about how those might correspond to the four levels of um, Pshat, Remez, Drash, and Sod, which are the four levels of interpretation that we have in Judaism. Like there's the simple Pshat, and that very clearly seems to be the procedural. And then we had a little discussion about the other three and like how they fit. I mean, that's a whole other discussion. But like, and I was so tonight I'm having a stream where I'm going to scream at Chezi a lot about his father, and I was preparing a by reading one of the article that I want to discuss, and his father was talking about how somebody who is stuck in a just, and I think this is actually what Ian McGilchrist says as well, but like somebody who is stuck just in the concrete, right, is like they can't they don't have the imaginal, they don't have that which extends beyond like reductive materialism, right? They don't have a metaphysics. They become fixated in the physical in he said one of three ways: psychotic, autistic, or I forget what the third one was, but like the relationship, like if it's all physical, if everything is like just books and money is just ink on paper, then you lose your capacity to understand the world and you lose your mind. Like that is a form of autism. And like we keep on asking, why is autism so much more prevalent now? And Ian McGilchrist, he talks about schizophrenia. Like he actually hypothesizes that schizophrenia, since we don't have ancient accounts of people acting how we say schizophrenia is, he actually thinks that schizophrenia is a malady that was caused by this reductive materialism.
That's interesting. I remember when Jacob was a baby and they were assessing him for autism, that's one of the comments was how many children that you saw in very intelligent families with mathematical, scientific thinking minds compared to just your, everyday run of the mill generalist kind of thinker. Somebody whose life was much more connected to sort of the day by day. And we tend to think of which creates that interesting conundrum when you look at the different ways they describe something like autism, because we tend to think that if you are exponentially more intelligent than the average person, your world becomes bigger, but in some ways it implies it can become smaller.
One of the things I've been noticing lately is some of the smartest people are the people who lack any wisdom.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is the incapacity to imagine and to, like, you can't have a predictive power if you Zach says, doctor says I'm autistic, but I think my drawings are crap. He's obviously from Boston. But yeah, so
the difference between intelligence and wisdom, do we even dwell on that very much? Like, I don't know. But you're right. I've heard that before. Sometimes, the most intelligent people they tend to lack wisdom.
Yeah, or you could call it common sense.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Like, all they know is that which, like, procedurally they've been taught. And that's actually what the article with Hazi's father really talks about. Yeah, that's what I was reading.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a certain weapon, then or like people that, then you don't see the other, like you're like you have tunnel vision, like you're used to seeing something one way or thinking in one way, so you can't imagine. But actually, what I was really wanting to mention is to maybe try to tie this into something else that was in the book. Maybe it's connected, but with thinking about how the Rav is really thinking about the creator, or the Halakhic Man as a creator. And here he was talking, I feel like he was talking about the other extreme, which is, I think he was talking about the passive person. So Jacob, you were just talking about the person that is highly practical, but cannot imagine anything beyond themselves. So maybe that's more of the cognitive man also here. But the Rav is kind of talking about maybe I was trying to figure out, what does he mean? Who is this passive person who cannot create? Is it a person that's just lazy, or that they can't take any kind of plan or any kind of potential and turn it into?
Is there a specific page you're thinking of?
So let's see. Yeah, I did a bad job of actually referencing this time, but let me look at it. If this works.
Mm-hmm. Where was it?
I think I see it maybe on 108 at the bottom. It says that passive type of person who is derelict in fulfilling his task of creation cannot become holy.
Mm-hmm.
Is that maybe what you were talking about?
I think I was just at 107, so I think it's coming to it. Kind of like the 108 passive type, derelict in fulfilling. Yeah, I mean, he talks about the creator and what the creator does, and what halakha does, which is bringing down this ideals, these abstract ideas, and bringing it down, as opposed to what the religious religioso, or the religious man here would think about it, which is escaping this world towards the high, the heavens. But halakha is about bringing these things down. So I don't know if he was, so the passive type is not well defined, or it's not explicitly defined. So it's why I'm asking this, why I'm bringing it up, because I was trying to think, who is he talking about? A lazy person? Because I was also trying to think about, I've heard rabbis, or the idea of being lazy as being something that is very much not perceived well in Judaism specifically. So trying to think about that.
So, yeah, I was, while you were looking that up, I was on 107, marking down in the middle of it to refer back to page 101. I'm really intrigued by the whole discussion of the creation, and the implications of it for halakha. So where I wrote it on 107 is the paragraph that starts, man is obligated to perfect what his creator impaired. That one. But I referred back to the middle of 101, where I'm looking at, well, actually, I'll jump one tiny bit ahead of where I was going to start. The peak of religious, ethical perfection to which Judaism aspires is man as creator, which I kind of mentioned, grabbed me before. Man is creator. When God created the world, he provided an opportunity for the work of his hands, man, to participate in his creation. The creator, as it were, impaired reality in order that mortal man could repair its flaws and perfect it. God gave the book of creation, that repository of the mysteries of creation, to man, not simply for the sake of theoretical study, but in order that man might continue the act of creation. And then it goes on to talk about Abraham.
I think possibly what's going on in terms of passive as opposed to creator, like what he seems to be saying is, I believe. So there's a famous midrash, and possibly he quotes it, but it's a very famous midrash, where a Roman comes and asks Rabbi Akiva, I believe it is, what is greater, the works of God or the works of man? And Rabbi Akiva, knowing where this guy is trying to trap him, says the works of man. And he says, how can you say that, right? How can the work of a man be greater than the work of God? And Rabbi Akiva shows him some wheat and some bread, and he says, what's greater? He shows him some grapes and some wine, and he says, what's greater, right? And that is because, and I forget who exactly was trying to catch him, because the Romans were very opposed to circumcision because they believed it was a sort of mutilation to change your body, right? And because they're like, well, God makes the perfect body, and to change it in any way is to mar it, to blemish it. Whereas Judaism, circumcision is the emblem of Judaism, in that we believe God left something for us to do, right? And I think that's the type of passivity that he is talking against, as opposed to creator,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, you can look at creation in a very materialistic way, and if you do, then how is cutting off something, right, an act of creation? Whereas if you think of creation as perfecting something, taking something and making it right, do I create something when I take wheat and thresh it and mill it and turn it to flour and bake it and knead it and bake it and turn it into bread, right? It's, in some sense, it's not creation, because like I didn't create the wheat. But in a different sense, I am creating something, in that I am creating a loaf of bread. And I think that's what he means by human beings being creators in partnership with God.
So I do have an odd question, because I was looking at the description of our homo religiosus concept of holiness versus, sort of where we were at the top of 108, and it talks about a new aspect of the idea of holiness arises here, in that place with the flawed world. We have already emphasized that while the universal homo religiosus understands the concept of holiness as a rebellion against this world, as a daring attempt to scale the heights of transcendence, Judaism explains the concept of holiness from this perspective of the secret of contraction. Holiness is the descent of divinity into the midst of our concrete world. For the Lord thy God walketh in the midst of thy camp. Therefore shall thy camp be called holy. From Deuteronomy 23:15. And we've talked before about that contraction, of God into our midst.
Hold on. So the contraction. So these are Kabbalistic terms that are being used. So God, in order for God to create a space. So the first creation was the first contraction, which is God contracting himself, removing himself from where he was, which is everywhere. And that's only a veil of darkness, right?
That's the word I was going to go for.
and then by revealing the godliness, right, we in a sense bring God into that halal is what it's called in Hebrew. That's that what do you call it? Not
vessel or empty space.
Empty space, right? And so the word halal, right, empty space, is the same word as whole, which means profane.
So, yeah, and I was thinking about sort of the veil that stands between us and God that we talk about in that sense. Then God is leaving opportunity for us to do something in a sense that removes that veil. Like when you were talking about the bread versus the wheat and stuff, if the wheat itself, because it is the creation of God, is evidence of his holiness, but we never can do anything with the wheat or with God beyond that, then we have somehow profaned the very purpose of that. But when you engage it, you create the bread, you're actually, is it not almost more of a kind of worship of God to create the bread than to simply admire the wheat?
Yeah, I think so. We don't remove the veil. This is part of what we were talking about in the Hebrew Bible study last night with Chazi, and he brings up the witch of Endor, right? So in the story of the witch of Endor, Saul goes and he consults a witch who conjures up the spirit of Samuel. And she doesn't say that it's Samuel, but talks about his coat, the coat that his mother made for him.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in a sense, he has carried that coat with him, right? And so the veil, it's not that we rip the veil and make it as if the veil did not exist. We, in a sense, we turn the darkness into light, right? So there's this idea that evil is the absence of good, right? That darkness is the absence of light. And the Jewish idea is no, God created darkness, God created evil, right? And what we have to do is we have to work it and, in a sense, turn it, not that it will be exactly good, because like I don't want people to misunderstand. This is a huge problem now that people think, oh, so it doesn't matter, right? Evil, good, it's all the same. And it's like, no. Evil and good are not the same. That is not what I'm saying, right? But there is something within evil that gives it its actual existence, which is in fact real and eternal, right? So Samuel's coat is something that he takes with him, that his soul takes with it back to the other side.
It's hard to understand. I'm not going to say it isn't.
Oh, it's very difficult to understand, but I think the reason why we are so insistent upon it, and I think it is actually what he's saying,
Mm-hmm.
is it's very easy for spiritual people to fall into Gnosticism. Like you can have the type of person who is you can have the type of person who everything is materialism, and they don't see the spiritual at all, and everything becomes just nothing. And then there are people who get lost in the spirituality and get lost in ideas,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there's something important about bringing the spirituality into the material and heaven and earth meeting, right? That that place where heaven and earth meet is incredibly important.
Yeah, I think that's where he positions the creator, definitely, because that's what it feels like. And also, he talks. He talks explicitly here about the darkness being active, first of all, being something that God created ex nihilo, with the light, and the fact that it's plotting, it's moving. So I think that it mentions on, where is it, on 103, about David taking, when he was building the temple, digging a hole and finding like some kind of shard. And the shard was telling him, don't move me. Or God put me here. I can't remember exactly. I need to find it, but
104.
104.
Bottom half of the page.
Yeah. When David dug the pits, the deep arose and threatened to submerge the world. David thereupon inscribed the ineffable name upon a shard, cast it into the deep, and it subsided. When David began to dig the foundation of the temple, he dug 15 cubits and did not reach the deep. Finally, he found one potsherd. I think this is the part. When one potsherd and sought to lift it up. Set the potsherd onto him, you may not. Said David unto it, and why not? Said the potsherd unto David, because it is I who am restraining the deep. Said David unto it, and for how long have you been here? Said the potsherd unto him, since the Almighty proclaimed on Mount Sinai, I am the Lord thy God. At that moment the earth trembled and began to sink, and I was placed here to restrain the deep. David nevertheless did not listen to it. As soon as he lifted it, the waters of the deep arose and sought to inundate the world. Right? Yeah. You were going to say something, Sandy?
Well, I was waiting to see if you were going to finish, but yeah, I read that part about 3 or 4 times, and I wondered, because as I got to the point in the story, how long have you been here? I thought instinctively that it was going to say since the beginning, the foundation of the world, but no, it says since Mount Sinai. I'm like, there is something there, and I don't know what it is. I don't understand it, but it's very important.
Maybe it's talking about, is it talking about the reference to the hook, to the law being, he talks about the law being constraints, being this, maybe right before this, he's talking about the law, how it makes a space that that the darkness cannot encroach. So, and the law was given on Mount Sinai. So maybe that is what this is. I don't know, Jacob, I don't know if you have another idea, but it seems to reference that.
So this idea, I am the Lord thy God, right? So Ani Havaya Elokecha, right? And what you have at the beginning of Genesis, in Genesis 1 and 2, right? First, it only refers to Elohim. It only uses that name, God, which gets translated as God. And that's a name that we can refer to other gods, right? We can refer to human beings as gods. It literally means powers, right? And then there's the Shem Havaya, the ineffable name. And the ineffable name gets translated as Lord, right? And so this is what Paul Vanderklay often talks about, God 1 and God 2. And if you haven't listened to the discussion that Yosef had with Paul Vanderklay about these concepts, I would definitely listen to them. But Ani Havaya Elokecha, I am the Lord your God, right? So this is something that when in Hebrew you're reading the Bible, you pay specific attention to, because there are places when it says Ani Havaya. It says, I am the Lord.
Mhm.
And there are places where it says, I am your God. And there are places where it says, I am the Lord your God. And the Shema is Shema Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, our God, right? Hashem Echad, right?
Yeah.
So,
I've wondered about that.
right. So this combination of the Lord and thy God is heaven and earth meeting. Is that God 1 and God 2 is the same God that, as PBK is constantly talking about. And frankly, I mean, Christina Hayes in the Yale series on the Old Testament, she really goes through showing that this is a major theme, if not the major theme, of the entirety of the Hebrew Bible, which is there is this way that God interacts with us, which is what, arenic, right? And then there's this way that God interacts with us, which is agentic. And these are two different ways. But ultimately, the whole point is Shema Israel, hear, O Israel, internalize within yourself that the Lord our God is one Lord. It's that these things merge. And it's at that merger, like that unification, that is the heart of Judaism.
Right, and the same movement or the same concept is like we spoke about this with the blessing, right? Like, blessed are you, Lord. Like, Baruch Atah
Hashem.
Hashem
Yeah.
Elokeinu Melech. So like
Melech HaOlam. Keep on going.
So even
So,
Lord,
yes.
yeah.
It's blessed are you, and the highest name we can give to God is you.
Mhm.
Hashem, which is the Lord, our God, right? Melech, king, ha'olam, of the world. So we're bringing God down into the thing, which is actually the opposite of Yehi Ratzon, right? Yehi Ratzon Hashem Elokeinu. No, Yehi Ratzon Elokeinu ve'Elokei Avotenu, right? Our God and the God of our fathers, right? So it should be your will, our God and the God of our fathers. So when we say a Yehi Ratzon, which is when we're trying to elicit something from God, right? We're trying to bring up our prayers. So that's they're opposite types of prayers. A Yehi Ratzon, may it be your will, God, as opposed to blessed are you, God, right? Blessed are you is gratitude, whereas Yehi Ratzon is what you call it is what am I saying? Is a petition. is yeah.
Which is interesting. Like you've talked about, God 1 and God 2 in the way that Paul refers to him. And that's an overlay. But then you've also talked, and I drew kind of when we were talking about the whole, the different, a couple of times drawn sort of that pit, that place where we were supposed to fill it, kind of the completion of creation. But then they also drew it the other way down. So it's kind of like, on the one hand, and I don't know if that's the same in Jewish prayers and culture as I'm used to, but when you pray, when you talk about blessings of God, you tend to picture, there's somewhere where it talks about, God opening the heavens and pouring out blessings upon you. And I'm like, so there is that sense in which on every plane of existence, there is somehow a merger, that coming together of the aspects of relationship with God and who God is, like, and his identity. And I'm like, why don't we talk about this more? But you guys do. Yeah. And then I wonder a few things I'm not going to ask because this is this study.
Elijah, you must have more comments. You haven't been saying much today.
No, I have nothing. But what did you guys think about this section on 109 at the, I guess it's kind of like the bottom paragraph? Judaism declares that a man stands at the crossroads and wonders about the path he shall take. Before him, there is an awesome alternative: the image of God or the beast of prey, the crown of creation or the bogey of existence, the noblest of creatures or a degenerate creature, the image of a man of God or the profile of Nietzsche's Superman. And it's up to man to decide and choose. I mean, it seems to be right, like a reflecting, Kierkegaard, kind of like the aesthetic life or the moral life, right?
Well, I put a little X there to come back to that too, because I've been reading the Psalms, and in one of the translations, it has one of those pre-headers where it talks about the two paths. And I'm thinking, but at the same time, it reminds me of the old book by Watchman Nee, Sit, Walk, Stand. And I'm going, oh, that's probably what he was reading, because when he was writing this book, and it's 20 years since I've read it, I don't have a good memory of what he was talking about. But in Psalm 1, it's talking about that place. The details intrigue me. and I'd have to look it up because I can't remember which I think it's, you do not walk in the way of sinners, you do not stand in the path of the, I want to say unrighteous, but that's not the word, scorners or something. And then, but you do not sit. And I'm like, so there is two paths mentioned, but do they even do that in the actual Hebrew Bible? Do they consider that in reference to like some kind of like a crossroads, a choice of two paths you can choose from? I kept playing in my mind that poem, standing in the wood, and you take the light. But I don't think God wants us to take away there. He's not saying you have to pick a right path, like in
He is. I mean, Deuteronomy 30 very clearly, it says, I have set before you life and death, good and evil. Right? And the interesting there is, it says, I have called the heavens and the earth to be witness against you, that I've set before you. Right? So the heavens and the earth are witnesses, are two witnesses to how we live our lives. There's good and there's evil at any moment, right? And what we are commanded to do, ubaharta b'chaim, you should choose life. And it's a difficult choice, right? But like we were discussing about Cain, it's there. God says, and you will rule over it.
It's a really interesting section, Elisha, that you were bringing, because now I'm thinking about it, and when he talks about life and death, like Jacob, what you just mentioned in terms of life and death, let's say these are the two paths, and here it also talks about, are you going to be the image of God or the profile of Nietzsche's Superman? And how the entire task of creation and the obligation to participate in the renewal of the cosmos, the most fundamental principle is that man must create himself. So it seems like, and again, I'm wondering this. It seems like the thing here is that man needs to, and this will go into the repentance thing, needs to recreate himself or renew himself. You can never be. I think maybe this is a reference to the Nietzsche, where it's like you're something that's defined or is total, and like you don't renew yourself, or you're something that cannot be denied or added to or renewed. Right? There's no wrong that you can do. You have the ultimate.
So this reminds me of a discussion I had earlier today, which was I was explaining how the Jewish concept of the soul is so different from how a lot of people seem to think of it, right? So that prayer that we talked about before, and that says, God, the soul that you have given me is pure. You created it, you formed it, right? And you put it within me, and you're the one who takes it out and puts it, and brings it back, right? And the question, like, okay, who's the me who's talking about my soul, right? What am I without my soul, right? And so the way I try to help Christians understand this is when Jesus says to his disciples, who do you think I am? They say, some say Elijah, some say John. And so the question becomes, like, Elijah, like, okay, maybe, but John, like, these are people who know John as an actual human being who baptized Jesus, and John is killed. How can Jesus be John, right? And to understand that, you have to understand that the Jewish concept of soul, that which animates you, right? It's very different from the material concept that, oh, like, I have this in my hand and it's solid and it is, right? And the reason I was telling him this was because he was asking me about marriage, right? And the relationship of his soul with his wife's soul, and and he was like, well, how does that work, that if I were to get divorced and remarried, right? Like, if she's the other half of my soul, like, how does this work, right? And I had to explain to him that the Jewish concept of soul, right, that your soul is that which God gives you to animate you at any point.
So it's more like the spirit of the age than like a ghost.
That's a very good way of putting it. And that's, so for example, it says that on the Sabbath, a Jew gains a soul, and at the end of the Sabbath, the soul leaves, right? So, like, what does that mean? You have an extra soul on the Sabbath, right? And everybody makes the joke. If you're ever in in religious communities, right? Everybody makes the joke that you can eat whatever you want because the extra soul is hungry, right? So at Sabbath meals, it's like, it's that extra soul. You have to feed it, right? But like, that doesn't make sense in the way that most people view soul in the cartoonish, oh, like, you die and this little image, perfect image of you floats up with harps and wings and halos. That's not the Jewish concept of soul.
So that's interesting because, like, I don't know, like in my family, you would assume, in the context I was raised, where a soul would be like your spirit, something intangible. Whereas when it talks about marriage, it says you become one flesh, which you tend to think as something tangible, and that's even weird too. So, but then people talk about being soul mates. So, yeah.
And I mean, part of that is in fact the unification of having the kingdom of God on earth as in heaven. It is a unification of heaven and earth, right? Which are very different things, but like this concept of unification of heaven and earth, man and wife, right? The spiritual and the material, right? That unification, I am the Lord your God. That unification is integral to everything the Bible is trying to teach us. And yeah, it takes every day you're trying to understand and fathom that.
Yeah. I really like this, but it has all of those tangible, intangible qualities. And I don't think I'm going to get it anytime soon. Not the way we think we do in the other ways we talk about it.
So, yeah, go ahead. So somebody messaged me that he's reading Proverbs and he's like every fifth one like hits you so hard, right? It's like, yeah, Proverbs, like that's the point of it, right? At the same time, like I keep on telling people, don't read Psalms like you read Proverbs, right?
That's playing little.
Yeah, and that's another unification, right? Like whenever somebody asks me about reading the Bible, the first thing I tell them is the Bible is not a book, it's a library. The Bible is not a book, it's a library. You pick up a book, you start at the first page and you go and you get to the last page. That's not how you read your Bible. You will never get through reading. Well, some people actually do struggle through it that way, and God bless them for their dedication, because that's not how it was meant to be read. And hopefully the next time they come to their Bible, they will know that sometimes you need a psalm. And that's the beautiful thing about the Psalms, right? Like a lot of people want to rip out the imprecatory Psalms, right? The El Nekamot, right? The God of vengeance, right? Like they that doesn't belong in my Bible. And it's like, yeah, it does, because Psalms is there to express what is in your soul. And sometimes what's in your soul is El Nakamot Hofia, God of vengeance, show yourself. Yeah. And there's a reason why it's just El, the 2-letter name, by the way, which doesn't translate. Yeah, that's one of the things, like the names and the stuff, like there's just so much I think just doesn't translate.
No, there's a lot of things that have been lost. there's just so much that's been lost, thinking that it's just a different word. But that's not what it means. That's not what it's about. You know, I was talking to Jacob's group home staff this week, and his primary care wants me to come and talk to the group home manager and one of the other staff about some of the hard stuff. But I keep coming back. The stories all seem to be, and how do you break it down? And how do you break it down? Because all I could give him was, most people dealing with an autistic nonverbal child are going to feed them specific words that will be useful to the person who is feeding them to them. Whereas, everybody looked at me like I was nuts because I kept saying, whatever goes in will eventually find, it'll find a home in there. It will do something. So every one of my stories is, no, I wanted him to understand how you learn and what the purpose of these things is and what you're going to do with them. So I have a kid who learned 2 languages through math, breaking things down to, well, if you know the word, you can show me, you can show me or finger spell the word. If you know the sign, you can do the sign. If you know how some of the sounds, you can try to say it. But if you can't do those things, we would always go, like when I would teach him to spell, we would go CAT, and he had this communication glitch in his brain that needed things slowed down more than we think of as slow. So slow it looks like slow is fast, according to the communication disorder specialist. I don't know. She always said she had a group of kids that he reminded her of who were not deaf or anything else. They just couldn't process things. So I would sit there and I would hold my letters there, C, and I've got the three C, A, T. And one of his favorite ways to communicate was, I knew that he could spell the word. I knew that he knew the sign. He just did not use any means of communication. So I would say, if you know a letter. So if I'm looking at something and we're showing the picture of a cat and he can't sign it or say it to me because it's somewhere percolating, doing whatever it's doing, he could do letters. Letters were his major communication. So he would do the first letter of any given word. And eventually, and she was saying to me, now he wants to learn how to spell and read better than he does. And I know he can read some. But when we're talking about the things that we're talking about here, that reminds me of those mysteries of all the ways that God taught, all the different things, because he breaks it down into us. And when you try to explain about the soul, or you try to explain, about the 2 gods and how things merge and how they line up, and I'm like, I don't understand it any more than the next person does in a way, but I kind of get it, because it means that when you do understand it, something inside has lined up so it's in correct alignment with whatever that was, and it comes alive in you, that you suddenly understand it.
Well, that's actually, this is what John Vervaeke's constantly saying. You recognize, you recognize, right? Yeah. And one of the things that he explained is because the world is so complex that we don't actually perceive the world. What we do is we predict what the world is like, and we perceive any my brain would work, but any error. So you have a model, and you perceive the errors. You don't actually perceive how the world is. That's actually how how cognition works.
I really have to say, I haven't properly listened to any of the usual culprits. I have not listened to them properly. I've started a little bit of Vervaeke, but I want to listen to more before the Chino. But what you just described is what we talked about in the book, in a way, in that God left, he left the world to us in a state whereby, if in recognizing the errors, we, like, you're basically saying you see what is by recognizing what doesn't belong there. That when you see the error, you suddenly know more about that which is not the error, which in a lot of what we're talking about then would be, we find God through continuing his work. And I'm like, that's not exactly right. But
no, actually, I mean, you're
it seems
ringing
like
a lot of bells for me.
Yeah. So it reminds you of a negative theology of and the error is kind of like it's not like the dark. I don't know if it's like the darkness that we spoke about, but it's something about the via negativa, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I was seeing. And it's so weird. I've learned an awful lot about things I didn't know I was learning in relation to how I keep telling people my kids raised me. I just kind of participated in it because I've learned so much that I'll go, oh, this is like what I did. And when we left off participatory at the beginning, going to all the, the typical ways that we would think about, from Vervaeke's 4 Ps, it's like, there is such a gift in that place where, even when you said to me, Jacob, what you shared about Psalms are not Proverbs, you cannot relate to them in the same way. The type of participation I offer into the activity of engaging with the word matters. And
yeah, actually, that's very much what we were talking about. The few minutes we actually read parts of Tanya with Ben was so we were reading the introduction, and he says sometimes the originality of how you deal with a problem is not the answer, but how you approach the problem.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right, that's cognition, right? I mean, is that how it works? I mean, because you have to think certain things become salient to you if you view it in a certain way, if you cognize it in a certain way. Yeah, I always like to tell this story. I always like to tell this story to my wife about I had to. I think it was where it really kind of made sense to me, like this idea of how the cognition, or that we kind of perceive the world through these values, or we do something before we perceive the world. Of I think it was her birthday or something, or it was towards around her birthday, and I was walking down the street, and suddenly I saw some kind of flower shop, and this was near her apartment which I would go to every all the time. Never saw that flower shop in my life, but I saw it at that moment because it was near her birthday, and I was thinking, okay, what should I get her, or what am I supposed to do? So it was salient to me at that moment, and this is why I saw that flower shop. So it was, I don't know. I don't.
Yeah.
I just like that example.
Elijah. So Elijah had to go. The next thing is going to be, he said, pages 117 to 137.
Mhm.
and he'll have to post updates later. Yeah, he was distracted the whole time. I think he had something he had to do. Yeah, and unfortunately, like we because it was Pesach last week, we had to push off the thing,
Yeah.
and we
Yeah.
weren't planning on that. So I kind of feel bad about that. Yeah. Um,
We've covered a lot.
Then
I was not gonna read this a third time, so I have no clue which sections you guys were reading, but like, yeah. So 137 is the end. So I don't know if Elijah was planning to have a
Oh,
summary, like, oh, the entire book, let's have a discussion thing. Um, the week after. That would make sense, but yeah.
yeah.
yeah. Did you spend much time thinking about next books, Ben? Or
So
you have a favorite?
I made a list of like 15 books, which Elijah very nicely went through and like found like their descriptions and like how long they are and things like that. So like he's been putting a lot of work into this.
I know.
And
Quiet.
like yeah, I tried to have several books from like several types of books so people could decide between different types of books. um and Yosef and Chezi looked at them. I don't know if they looked at them and like they didn't say anything thing. I like I mean we can even when you guys take a look at them, we can discuss more. And if like you you know there are certain a type of book you guys want to do, we can do that. Um, the reason I was saying I was saying Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust
Yeah.
is because I think that's one of the easiest reads of the narrative type. And like I've been really thinking about narratives, but there are other books also that are narrative, like Rabbi Nachman's Tales might, because those are actually allegories. That might be something to go into. That so yeah, we'll you guys can take a look. And maybe suggest other things. I mean, if there's books you've seen that they're like, or you've heard about that, oh, this gets, this is something people ask about.
I didn't have a list. I'm more of like I'm curious to just hear other people's recommendations. It sounds already like we would have a lot of options to look at. Um, I'm curious to kind of like ride the spirit of the.
I'm pretty sure I included both of these on the list.
Which are?
Derech Hashem, the way of God, and Mesilat Yesharim, which is the path of the just. Both of these are by Rabbi Chaim Moshe Luzzatto, the Ramchal, and they're very Kabbalistic. And honestly, if we really do these as book clubs, I don't know how many years it's going to take.
Yes, cycle of like 6 years. Yeah.
And that's why I tried to kind of give like options other than these, because like, yeah, these are important Jewish books, but they're also Jewish books that you like in yeshivas. Like okay, you're expected by the time you graduate high school to have been through this, you know?
Oh, I go through some of the thrift stores and I walk down this section that has, like so many of the thrift stores are run by like just different churches and Christian organizations. You go past all the Christian books and the little things and the 5 billion novels of, like that everybody wants to fill their church library with. And I'm like, and then I come here and you guys are talking about books you read all the way through high school. Like, oh, the world on tilt. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there are certain things. So I think like Catholics, they have the Summa Theologica, right? And the Eastern Orthodox have the Church Fathers, right? But like, how many times can you read the Heidelberg Catechism, right?
Oh, even worse. So the Heidelberg Catechism, it's a good size chunk out of the back of your basic hymn book that they'll put in. But John read Calvin's Institutes, which is it's like that thick, and twice he read it, and he's dyslexic.
Okay.
I'm like, loved that book, and I'm like, I don't know. I wonder, but there are a number of things in Judaism where you take great pleasure and great value out of reading the accompanying books written by many rabbis, just talking about
commentaries upon commentaries upon commentaries upon commentaries. Yeah.
But
This is
so isn't that the point of the creation? Like, this is what about the chidush and like the
cool. Yeah, that's exactly what so it's so it's funny to me when people say and people say this all the time, like, that's from the Talmud, not from the Bible, or they know their Talmud, they don't know their Bible. And it's like,
oh no,
like
don't say that.
you're like, it's like that's like saying you read your Gospels but you've never seen Isaiah. Like, that's from the Gospels, it has no relationship with Isaiah. And it's like, well, how do you understand your Gospels without understanding Isaiah exactly?
Yeah.
or actually the Psalms, no, actually, I mean, I think it's even more possible to understand the Gospels without a background in the Bible than it is to understand to understand the Talmud without it.
Yeah. I find myself perplexed because when you listen to a lot of preachers talking about God's salvation and how he works, and the concept is like, all of these, years and years and years went by, and suddenly God went, okay, so let's just get done with this, step into history. And I'm like, that's not how I've read it, but that's how it kind of comes across, even though they'll talk about, it's not like we don't in churches talk about the Old Testament, but those two words say so much. It's like it's only there to be Cole's notes for everything else. In some things I hear, which is really insulting, because that's completely the opposite of what's true. And when we talk about the things that we talked about tonight, the whole reality of God's interaction with us, it's already all there. Like, so I'm a terrible Christian. I've never actually understood some of it. Like, I would never try to prove, I can't prove things that I've learned in church. I always think of the word prove like baking bread, like when you knead it so that it will rise. You know, that kind of proof. But if you do everything that's supposed to make the bread rise and it just sits there like a lump, what do you do with it? I mean, you still eat it if it's, if you're hungry and it's edible, but it's, if it's supposed to have reacted. Yeah. I find myself really engaging with this book. And then I asked myself, because for so long, I listened to some of the conversations going on around me about, the 5 billion splits that, somehow refine things and make everybody more right, only they really aren't. And all I've really wanted to focus on was am I in right relationship with God? Was my husband in right relationship with God? Are my children in right relationship with God? What are we all doing about that participatory place,
Mm-hmm.
And even John's he's not settled about it, For all of the Calvin's institutes and all of the, joy he finds in talking to people about parts of things that really touch on what he finds important.
Well, so this is the thing. I don't think you can ever be settled in your religion. And I think way too many people desire, and that's ultimately what he says. That's what he's talking about. He's like, no, it's not, it's not tranquility, and that's not, and
A little chaos is good for you.
Questioning, right? Not necessarily, the questioning like Moses, or trying to find out more, or find out, not doubting the purpose, but questioning, or just, but it's hard to articulate, and it's obviously hard. The line there is hard to think about, because I feel like that's why people. Maybe that's one reason why people want to be settled, because they're afraid of is my questioning, if I'm questioning something, if I'm going somewhere, is that something I'm not supposed to do, or is that doubts that I'm not supposed to have? So you kind of maybe try to go the other way. Could be one reason.
That place is something in life that I have really struggled with. In all of the places that most people don't like even this trip to Chino, I got so freaked out about actually booking an air flight, and I've flown before. I'm not scared of flying or going or getting there. And if you told me I had to go stand by, get on a in a lineup and go right now and do it, I would figure it out on the way and know that I'm perfectly capable of figuring out on the way. But when you look into something that isn't yet, I've been very raised to really question myself on things, which completely belies everything I did with Jacob in terms of raising him as a kid. I saw in him a place that I hadn't been allowed myself, and wanted to provide him with resources for it. So why do I get so fussed about things? That's interesting. And I'm not quite sure if I quite answered that to what you were getting at, Ben, but yeah, we kind of, and I don't desire perfection in the sense that I never want to have trouble in life. Trouble's kind of fun problems to solve in some ways, but not all kinds of trouble, but some kinds of trouble, having questions. having questions is fun kind of trouble. Yeah. I like our book study. I always kind of leave with this kind of warmth, like I'm warmth of having engaged with it and going. I arrive and and get told you always have something, and I'm like, no, I just read and reread it, and I don't have a clue yet, but I'm gonna actually have realized that grabbed me. I just kind of go on instinct, and ask questions, and then go, could it possibly be, or is this that, or does that relate to? That's the fun part. I like that about this. So whatever we're studying next, yeah, fun,
Yeah.
but not too easy.
I think we'll be able to find something challenging as well. I've already heard a lot of the good recommendations, so
That's good. You always surprise me. And I've watched a little bit of your conversations with Jacob and some of the other studies and that you've done, and you have you have a humility about what you know, but then when you go to talk about something, I'm like, oh, you know stuff. Like, I don't know those things, and I'm way older than you. So yeah.
Okay, friends, it's 8:30.
Yes, it's 11:30.
I am thinking we end the broadcast here.
Thank you.
And because in an hour or so, I am going to be doing a different broadcast.
And you need energy for that one.
Yes. And I need my voice so I can scream at Chazi.
I will probably have to watch it tomorrow after real time, unless for some reason I wake up in the night on instinct. There's something really cool in argument mode. Then I'll watch live for a few minutes.
Good night, people.